Hello, everybody. Let me know if you can see me and hear me. Hopefully, I've got this as close as possible. I know I talk fast and mumble sometime. That came up last show, which was not last week because I am really bad at remembering Monday holidays. Justin very kindly reminded me that I would not be doing a show last Monday, which is good because I probably would have just, gotten all ready and everything and then realized. So I'm finally going to talk about contests, the MSP Open in particular, since hopefully some of you are coming out to this, or some of the people who watch it later on YouTube or VOD. But Queenie said no one remembered the holiday. But I'm also going to talk about contests a little more generally. I will literally be referencing two of the articles on my website. So one is, what did I call it? I think it's miniature contests at conventions and shows. I think I said I updated that last show, and then I went and looked at it, and I realized that I was still mid-edit, and there was some weirdness. So if you looked at it, a couple weeks ago when I mentioned this, go look at it again. It now doesn't have random white space, and all the words are there. But what's more important is if you scroll down to the bottom, there's kind of a calendar of competitions and then show style competitions that you can attend. So one's at conventions, and I guess that's the first thing. What's a convention versus a show? And I know this camera's doing that thing. Maybe I should just flip to the other view so that we can look at a miniature. And I'll just grab a random miniature. I got a fancy setup today. So what's the difference between a competition and a show? Or a convention and a show. A convention has lots of stuff going on. Most of them are going to be gaming conventions, but you have something like Gen Con and it's got like lots of stuff going on. There's movies, there's costume, cosplay contests. Well, ReaperCon has cosplay contests now. So there's a lot of stuff going on. A classic show is if you've been to the MSP Open where all the miniatures that people have brought to enter in the competition are out on tables and you look at them, that's the point of a show. There's also a vendor's room. There may be a seminar or 2 or 4 on sculpting or painting, but hanging out and talking to other fans and showing off your stuff and getting it evaluated by the judging teams is the point of a show. So a convention has like lots of other stuff going on, and a show is just about miniature, just about looking at and assessing and buying miniatures and related things. So ReaperCon, I guess technically is kind of a hybrid thing. We're going to talk about that. So traditionally, the competition, I didn't bring any trophies with me or anything. I should have brought a Sophie so you guys could see how cool Sophie Trophy is. But you've probably seen how cool Sophie Trophy is. And if you have other questions about the MSP Open, as I'm talking, there is a section on the reapercon.com website that talks about it. You can see the rules. You can see pictures of all, like not just like the very special entries. You see everybody's entries and everything that everybody entered, not just the thing that the judges assessed. So you can get an idea. You can get, I'm only going to be showing my own miniatures today because it's what I have, and I also don't mind dissing my own miniatures. I don't feel comfortable critiquing other people's miniatures, but I am fine ripping my own stuff apart. I do it all day long. So that will give you the opportunity to see other examples of things. Because one of the things I'm going to start talking about is the categories, because that's what really confuses people, I think, about the MSP Open. That's one of the confusing things. So in a traditional contest at a classic game con, or even your store may do this, it'll be, I call it podium styles, like the Olympics. There are however many people are entered in a category, only, there's only going to be gold, silver, bronze, or first, second, third, or maybe if it's a smaller contest, there's only going to be first place. I've been to Gen Con when they operated this way, did 5 places for a while, so they did first through fifth. So it really is very competitive then. Some of those have a system for acknowledging miniatures that were in contention. So they'll do a first cut, which is the judges go through and they look at a bunch of stuff. Hold on, I'll pick some other miniature up to. So this is the Sophie from a couple years ago. So I wanted to bring some of the Sophies just so even if you don't go, you're going to be able to get your hands on the convention Sophie and some of the other convention stuff. So I just thought I would bring her. She's not really an example of a contest thing. Well, sort of. Anyway, I'll get there. So that first cut, some contests will have like a shelf that all the first cut things go on. They might even put up a little note that says these were the first cut. I've heard, I think Games Workshop, Golden Demon now, they have a pin or I don't know, there's some kind of little coin. There's a designator so that you know your stuff was really good. It was so good the judges looked at it even if it didn't get picked for top 3. So that's kind of a traditional format, and if you haven't gone to a con in a while or you've only ever heard of those kind of contests, that is not how it works everywhere. So at shows, and increasingly, I was excited to see when I was doing the research to update all the dates and links and stuff. So I've tried to find as many contests. This is all in-person stuff. I don't think trying to track online contests would be a realistic goal for me. But I've got stuff in Europe, the UK, USA, and Europe. I said Europe. I don't have anything yet for South America, Canada, Africa, or Asia, or Australia. I'd love to, if you know of a convention that has a miniature contest, even if it's kind of regional or small, I'm very happy to add that to that page. I want to give people as many opportunities. I know it's hard to travel to something like ReaperCon if you don't live close enough for, to drive or to do it economically. So I'm trying to find as many other options as I can. But when I was updating, I noticed that a lot of the US conventions, at least, had switched to adopting a lot of the elements of a show, like the MSP Open, and the MSP Open adopted that from these military figure groups, historical figure groups. They were originally military, then they kind of expanded, and they're open to fantasy and stuff. I'll get to that in a minute. I know I'm not very focused. This is why I wrote it down. So if you want to read it in a more focused manner, it's there. So by contrast, a show style and increasingly conventions like KublaCon, Gen Con, Nova were the 3 that I noticed that had adopted this. There may be others as well, but those are the ones that really made it clear that was their style of doing things. You're kind of competing against yourself. So there's like a standard for what would be required to get a silver medal or a gold medal or a bronze medal. And the judges assess the work based on that and assign the corresponding medal. So everyone gets feedback on what they're doing. You don't have to be one of the winners, or at least in this first cut category. You get some idea of where you are and how you're doing. And I mean, you're welcome to enter these kinds of contests just for fun. You don't have to only enter contests if you're like an amazing painter or if your goal is to like rank up, especially at Reaper. We're all just mini fans. We just want to see cool stuff. We love everything. We love seeing the gaming miniatures. We love seeing there's one of the interesting things about open shows is you can get some kind of untraditional stuff in there. So I was really happy. Reaper used to do it the old way because everybody used to do it the old way, apart from these historical miniature groups. And then when they switched over, I loved it. I loved it as a contestant, and I love it as a judge because, more people get information. More people can get excited about what they've done. So I highly encourage you, if you're not comfortable with the idea of entering one of these, it's super competitive, Golden Demon, that kind of thing. A show is a completely different experience. Consider entering it. Like, people just like to look at stuff, even in the really competitive contests. Like, I've sat beside the display cases for something, and let me find another cool Reaper miniature. Here, you can look at something older. This is my if you ever go on the forums, this is, I think I'm still using this one as my forum avatar. And she was like one of the ones where I started feeling like I was figuring out what I was doing this. I think this was one of the first swords I did non-metallic metal on. And then I actually spilled grape juice or something to study what a spill would look like. I'll talk about the miniature specifically. I'm getting off track again. I'm just trying to show you something so that you don't have to look at my flickery face screen. I'll just pop in for a minute. Hi, it's me. But it's going to flicker because I keep forgetting to tell my husband about that. Well, let's watch. Is it not doing it? Maybe it's not doing it anymore. So I do. So anyway, I sat beside the cases at all kinds of competitions, or while wandering around in the room at ReaperCon, and the miniatures that people look at and get excited about are not only the ones that win or by super famous people or anything. Like people like what they like. They like fun ideas. They like their favorite game. They like their favorite kind of monsters or characters, and they enjoy looking at and emotionally respond to and really get into all kinds of stuff. It's not just the amazing things. So I really encourage you to not. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with criticism, or I don't know, if you don't feel comfortable entering a contest and you feel like it would be too emotional for you, that is 100% valid. I'm not trying to push people to do it who don't feel comfortable with it. I'm just talking about people who are kind of like, oh, I'm not good enough. Why should I bother? It's because people are going to enjoy your stuff. And then at something like ReaperCon, you are getting considered. You are getting considered with every bit as much of the attention of the judges as the biggest name painter there. So the thing that gets confusing about there's a few things. The first thing that gets confusing about the show style versus the contest style is the categories. So traditional categories would be stuff like fantasy, gaming scale miniature, fantasy monster, sci-fi or modern or steampunk, single or large or unit. Like it kind of divides it up by the size and the type of the miniature. And the open shows do it completely differently. So the traditional categories at any open show are painters, open, and ordnance. Some of the more historically focused shows divide those in two, where there's historical painters, and that would include modern soldiers or whatever, Elvis, that kind of thing, real people, and more modern stuff, as well as Napoleonic or cavemen or whatever. But then fantasy, horror, and sci-fi would have their own painters section. So ReaperCon doesn't do that. There's no division by topic, but we do have painters, open, ordnance, and then we also added diorama, because lots of people in our community make amazing dioramas, and it reflected the kind of entries that we were seeing. So that's one of the confusions, is what is open. So painters, let's start with painters, because that's the easiest one, and that's where I live. I live in painters for the most part. So this is very much a painter's entry example. And I have this, let me move some things, because I have this other camera set up so that I can do this. I wanted to give us, sometimes on the show I talk about like value structure and how you need to make an impact at this size as well as look at this size. And that's very much the case with the contest, because so your miniature's on a shelf and there's not this nice plain background. There's a bunch of other miniatures in a show style. There's tables and things are about at chest height, but you can see the people on the other side of the table walking by. You can see the other miniatures there. You can see, like, there's a lot of visual clutter. So it's kind of like if you're scrolling a web page and looking at, little icons and deciding which ones to click. It's a similar situation. So it's good to think about making a miniature look good here. And a lot of people I know who want to enter contests, and I 100% did this myself, will think that it's just this stuff that matters. It's doing freehand and fancy effects and OSL and non-metallic metal, and it's got to look good here. In your face is where a contest or display miniature needs to look good. And that is absolutely not the case, because the judges know that it is tough to do both. And generally speaking, if something looks good here, it has a good value. So this is the value camera right here, where we're just seeing black and white. It has a good value and color structure that helps people kind of look at it and immediately get what's going on. Like, you maybe can't see all the details there, like what are all these little things on the base or whatever, but you can pretty quickly figure out that this is a mermaid sitting on a thing. You probably can figure out she's having a drink, even if you can't tell if it's a beer. And that's kind of what you want, especially as you start getting to more complex stories or characters. You want people to be able to figure out at a glance what it is. So in Painters, if you go on the reapercon.com site and then look at the MSP rules, it actually has the numeric breakdown that the judges are looking at. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but in Painters, 70% of the consideration is like painting skill. So there's like 5 criteria overall. There's painting, hold on. It's like painting, creativity, workmanship. I always review this before I go into judging, so don't worry that I won't know it then. Difficulty. So difficulty, creativity, presentation, workmanship, and painting. So painting is 70% of what they look at. So you don't have to be able to sculpt or convert or whatever very well. You don't have to do it at all. You can have a complete stock miniature, as this is. I did put the little shells and things on the base, but you don't even have to do that. And that's the thing that gets a little confusing sometimes. And I'll circle back to that, is how much does base matter in Painters, or in what way does base matter in Painters? You can have done conversions and sculpting and enter in Painters. They're just not going to be very strongly considered as factors when the judges are looking at how things look. When they're assessing the difficulty and the creativity. It would contribute to creativity and presentation, but conversions and sculpting aren't going to really contribute to painting. They are part of workmanship. But like, those are a much smaller section of what is considered for Painters. So that's fairly evident. But then we have open versus diorama. So open is, let me find my example. Well, actually, let's do ordnance, because ordnance I have the one example for, and it's not quite as complicated. So ordnance is typically things like model tanks, airplanes. It can be from scratch. I mean, these vehicles, machines of war, those kinds of things. So this is a very small and not great representation of something that would be an ordnance, but it's what I have. It also allows me to point something out that is important difference between ordnance and the other categories. And that is that the thing, the machine of war, the device, is the primary consideration. This guy would only be considered in the same vein as a base would in Painters. He's like an accessory. He's like something you added for creativity or something like that. So even if this was fantastically painted, which it is not, but if this were fantastically painted and this were crap, it wouldn't matter how amazing this guy is. I would not get a gold in ordnance. I have to do an amazing job on this. And part of that, because most of the time it is kits or things that people are, heavily converting or constructing themselves. Workmanship is a big factor here. Getting the seams, the good joins, doing the pins and rivet, the pin washing and the rivets and all. If you've ever done vehicles, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, that doesn't mean you can't enter this category. But just be aware that people, like, you've got a motorbike with a rider, or, like a Star Wars speeder with a rider. they're a factor, but they're accessories. They're not the main event in the ordnance category. I would get dinged pretty heavily in this because I have put the canon on backwards. So I like to pretend that that is because this guy is undead and he wasn't thinking it through, but in reality it was me not thinking it through. This is from a while back, and so this is an example of, we'll come back to the bases. I said I'd come back to the bases later. Hopefully there's like someone there listening and you're not all deadly bored, and we can talk about other things if you have like general questions or stuff you want to talk about in chat. Feel free. Like, it doesn't have to be contest related. I just thought I'd run through this because we get a lot of the same questions every year, and I want to do my best to make it as unconfusing as possible and give you the best chance of success as possible. And also, a lot of right now what I'm talking about is very contest and ReaperCon specific, but when it comes to like improving your stuff, that applies for if you want to make nicer gifts for friends and stuff, or just improve generally. Most of that advice applies. Okay, so that was ordnance. You definitely want to go look at pictures on the reapercon.com galleries, because clearly I don't have very good examples of that. So open is, if what you would think about for open is you think about somebody like Derek Schubert or Christine Van Patten, people who sculpt and paint. Andy Pieper's another example. And you don't have to be a Reaper sculptor for this to apply. Those just happen to be people I can name off the top of my head. So they can sculpt a whole miniature and then paint it. They maybe can't paint it. I mean, Derek can, because Derek's magic and he can do everything. But, Andy and Christine are maybe not painting their miniatures to quite the same paint level that I would, but paint doesn't count for as much in open. So in open, it's like paint is only 30%, and the workmanship and the difficulty and the creativity, all that stuff is a lot more about the sculpting, and that's more important. But conversions can count and basing can count, but this is where people get into trouble, because they'll put in something like this, say. We'll do a few examples here. And then to make it easier, I'm just going to discuss what diorama is as well. So diorama is like a story or a vignette. So story is the most important criteria in diorama. The figures should be interacting. They should be, conveying some narrative or emotion or something that the viewer can grasp. And so this might include base construction and conversion, and that will be factored into difficulty and creativity and stuff. But if you can put together an amazing diorama from stock stuff and pre-made terrain and scatter and stuff, that's fine. That is fine too. Story is the focus. So this maybe would count as a vignette, but there's not really a strong story here. I mean, in my imagination, she was like the priestess, and it's a harvest festival kind of a thing, and she's standing in front of the temple door, kind of blessing the offerings as they're made. So I didn't actually sculpt any of this, I don't think. Okay, I might have sculpted, I think I sculpted like the apples and the orange. I made circles. And the stairs. But everything else were like bits that I had that I assembled together. And this was like a press mold that had various things from a tavern. So it had bread, and then I can't remember if that was metal or it might have been resin. These are actually teeth off something, I think. This is from a Reaper sprue, and to me they just look like little hot peppers, but I think they were some creature that has teeth. If in the chat you can identify what model those came from, you will definitely get bonus points. These are beads from like Joanne or Michaels, and this is a bit. But then the chain is, I found my necklace that I had with the smallest links and cut it. This is like an aquarium piece, I think. So this is, even though like I put a lot of things together and it was a lot of work, this is not suitable as an entry for open. This is a conversion. She's originally holding some kind of staff, and I converted it to be holding this sensor, but I didn't really do major conversion work on this by any stretch of the imagination, and I certainly didn't do major sculpting because I made a green pepper and some balls. So this would not do well in open. I don't know if the paint is good enough that it would maybe get it a bronze, but this is not in the spirit or the intention of what the open category is. I could probably enter this in diorama. The story's not strong, so I don't think that would be the best place for it either. So even though, you know, I've done all this extra basing stuff, the best place to put this would probably be painters. Now, I think it's possible that I did put this in open because the first few years we kind of refined how things worked. We got closer to the, so there's the international judging standards, is what the historical figure shows use, and we weren't originally judging open by those standards, and we have shifted to do that. Even originally, I think I got a bronze for this, maybe a silver, but I don't think so. I think it was a bronze. But this, I wouldn't even try to put this in the, oh, this is another bead from the bead store. I got like a whole collection of those because you can do some neat things with them. So this is not in the spirit of the open. It might be okay. Like if I already had something I want to enter in painters, I might throw it in diorama if that's what I have. So let's look at another example that's kind of similar. Hold on, all right. I was trying to be careful and not, there were a couple of things I couldn't bring because they're not, you know, Twitch compliant. Says, I feel like the light has gone very bright again. Let me try that. Get it a little bit away from the lens. See if that's a bit better. I don't know, it seems a little blown out again. Oh, they did an update and maybe they undid my things. I wrote them down somewhere. I'll have to find where that is. Anyway, that would have been good to do before I did a show all about looking at miniatures, but I knew I shouldn't have clicked yes to the update. You know how they're always asking you that, right? Before you need to use your software, and it's important. So this main piece comes with the Reaper miniature. Again, you'll get bonus points if you guess which one it is, because I'm not sure it's in production anymore. And I think it has that skeleton on it, but I added this guy and the rubble, and this is a resin figure, and I always break resin figures. Like when I was collecting things to show you today, I broke one of my resin figures, and I lost her hand. And I like lost it. My husband's normally really good at finding those things for me, but this was gone. So I had to search through all my miniatures for something that had like a hand that was about the same scale and the gesture I wanted, and do a conversion. So that was like an unintentional conversion. You know what? I'm gonna see if I can address this thing. But what did I do with the paper? All right, maybe I can figure it out without the paper. Color correction. No, isn't that weird? It does have all my numbers on. Okay, I feel like this looks really blown out compared to how we'd gotten it looking in previous weeks. So I'm just gonna try bumping I'll just bump my light down. Maybe that'll do the trick. So let me know in the chat if you think that looks a little more natural. She is fairly pale skinned, but she's not like pasty. She's not meant to look undead. The other guys are meant to look undead. So again, even though I've done some stuff, this is not really in the spirit of open. I do think this one is fine for diorama. There's a story here. I've never actually really decided whether I commanding these guys or fighting them off. The name of this piece was, maybe I should have got some armor after all or something, I think. Hey, Zachariah, I am. Ooh, and you've subscribed for 10 months. Thank you. we appreciate that. So this is absolutely in the spirit of diorama. There's a story. It's maybe not the strongest story ever, but it's pretty clear. It would be fine in painters as well. The story and the conversion wouldn't count as much, but they'd be considered a little bit. So that's another example of that. This one's going to be interesting. Can I tip this over? So this is another one that I would say is a similar thing. So what I did with this one, and this was probably before Reaper even changed the categories, is how old this was. I thought I'd bring some older stuff too. So he actually removes from this because he was really for an online contest. So I wanted to be able to take pictures from all the angles. And then these, for some reason, are no longer fully attached. They spin. I don't know why. So I've got like little brick rubble for where he punched the wall. And then wadded up newspaper. And it's meant to look like pavement, tarmac, whatever we call that. Like it's an alley or something. So this is another one that even though, I constructed this whole thing, I mean, I didn't really do the bricks. Those are, they have like styrene, plastic card textures. Oh, I didn't do this with the other one. So here's an example of how texture differences as a kind of contrast work, even, when you take something to black and white. You can still see the difference in the metallics versus the not. So this is a metal miniature. I don't think it ever got converted to bones, but this is a Reaper miniature. These are model railroad pieces. I think O is, so we're hey, no time for bull. We're kind of in between HO and O for scale, so it depends on what the thing is. Certainly for plants, which are great. You can get some great option for like plants and basing stuff from model railroad things. But these I think were O. It also had a mailbox. Maybe a telephone pole, like a telephone thing in the kit. I can't remember now. I had to order away for it. My local store, my local hobby town, has some things, but didn't have that. So this is a good example to show for entering things into ReaperCon or any other contest, because it may not be obvious to the viewer. The judges are coming down the row and they're looking at your stuff. They may assume that this has been attached. And certainly if you have something on a plinth, let's get a plinth, a piece of wood, we are going to assume it's attached. We are in fact trained when we come and we want to pick it up and look at it, we go like this. So if you have not attached it, it goes like this. This is not a theoretical example. This has happened to more than one judge. I get it. Sometimes you're not done or you want to be able to use stuff for gaming and you don't want to, commit. But in that situation, what I would probably do, because I'm paranoid, I would probably blue tack this down a little bit or something. But you'll have an entry card and you can add additional information. It doesn't have to be on your entry card. You can have a separate little card that you've printed out that says figure is not attached, or figure is, lightly glued in, or figure is blue tack, take it off so you can see what the front looks like. You can put a message to the judges. We do our best to respect that, but bear in mind that you are assuming all risk if you're making the choice of entering something like this that might look as if it is constructed, but is not. But that is an option. And I'm not saying we constantly break miniatures, but it has happened on occasion, and absolutely we tilted it over to look at it and there wasn't a little note. Bear in mind that contest staff may also have to move your things around. If we get more entries than expected in category, they might have to shift things around to make more space. Or if we're judging for special awards, we take things and move them to another table to look at them. So things, you are the primary person who's able to touch your miniature at a show because you put it out on display as you want it to. but judges and contest staff may have to touch it, so bear that in mind. So that's, so I would again be willing to put this in diorama or painters, but it is not in the Spirit of Open. So let's show one that is more in the Spirit of Open. And this is interesting because we're going to have the kind of a shadow if I don't hold it just right. So this figure, the body is one miniature, the head is another miniature. The original figure is like holding a bowler hat. So I had to, carve it away and restore the suit. Then on the bride, the original miniature has a different belt. These are both Reaper figures as well, put together elements of Reaper figures. And I shaved off the belt and then added a sash. And then to make it look as if they were interacting better, I resculpted both their hands on that side. Then this whole thing is constructed. Once again, these are beads from the jewelry store. Told you they come in handy. The original version of this, which you can see on that page, I used like netting because I thought that would look more, would have a neat texture and stuff. And then I like really, really, really hated it, how it looked. So, there you can see behind the curtain, and the top structure is constructed from, so that's thin plastic card. And then these, I think, are bamboo rods from my brush holder. So I had a brush holder that was intended for long handled brushes, and I cut it down, but I kept the little pieces of bamboo because I thought they'd be cool for doing stuff. And then after the painting, there are dried painted flowers in her hair, and then this bouquet is constructed from flowers as well. Is this the same as what Derek Schubert and Christine Van Patten are doing? Absolutely not. But it is significant enough changes to be in the Spirit of Open. So I would put this in. I wouldn't expect a gold, but I would have no qualms about putting this in Open and considering it an appropriate entry. Oh, and I don't. So there's a tradition in Jewish wedding ceremonies. They usually wrap the glass in cloth, but I wanted it to be more evident. So I put together the little broken pieces of glass as well. This was for a really fun online competition that they don't have anymore called Iron Painter, where you'd have like a theme, and the theme was like a really important part of staying in the contest. And you only had 2 weeks. So those were kind of the significant things. So the theme of this was the next step. So I always like to try to hammer the theme as much as I could because it was so important. So this is like a metaphorical next step in terms of getting married, and then he's literally taking a step. Don't be afraid to be too obvious is a contest tip I will get to. So the other reason, that would also be fine in diorama. That's clearly a story. And it's pretty small. And that is fine. So sometimes people have this idea that dioramas need to be like where you do half an in and it's got like 47 characters and there's all this stuff going on. And very rarely have the best dioramas I've seen been big, showy things. Or people get really wrapped up in being realistic. Like, okay, they're jousting, so I've got to make this field as long as a joust field would really be. And then there's just like all this empty space in your story, and it doesn't have the same emotional impact. So shrinking things down, compressing them to the smallest possible amount, thinking of it like a movie poster where you're just trying to cram as much of the story and characters into that one thing as possible, or like a single panel of, a single panel comic instead of a graphic novel. That is how to think about doing dioramas and story with miniatures. Like, you don't want, especially if you're doing it for online stuff, you don't want people to have to look at like 5 pictures to figure out what's happening. You want to have one picture where you can kind of get what's happening. So here, this one actually sort of breaks that rule, because to me, the real story is this. So this guy's all excited, and this is called Fool's Gold. this guy's all excited that he's found, you know, one gold nugget. But in his excitement, he has knocked over his water pail. So the little vulture is kind of like, yeah, I think that I'm the one who found gold. But then at the back, there was a little mole who just has like a whole pile of gold in his den. So that was I made all of this to have this joke, really, because that's how I like to do it. And Jason Weeby very kindly helped me out with this started as a little squirrel familiar, and I was not doing very well. So Jason helped me make it look more like I did the pose for him, which is, here, I'll recreate it for you guys. I did that for him, so he knew what I meant. Then we can look at him in black and white, and also at a small distance, where, you know, it can be a little trickier with dioramas to get does it work from a distance. So this would even, I mean, I didn't do the sculpting, so I'm definitely not getting any credit for that. And this is a piece of bark. So this is definitely not open, but this is very much a diorama piece. If I wanted, I could put this in Painter, but this is very suitable for entry in diorama. What else have I got? But you see, it's small. And small is fine. So, and in fact, sometimes it's good, like think about what you want to do. Yes, so my original, Grey Mouser is asking if there was a magnet on the bottom, and someone else had a magnet on the bottom. That would be easier to show. Oh, her magnet came out. Who else? Well, I'll show. This is another Sophie. This is actually still, I think, my favorite Sophie. There are a couple that are like really close to this, but I think Bourbon Street Sophie. And now you can get Sophies without any trouble. So there's, actually, no, this is metal. My case, I got my case before, like back when people used to make them by hand and like commission the case from someone. And his method for doing it was he had some places with magnets on the wood shelf, and then you just use little pieces of metal that are less expensive. But then I switched over to the other case where it's the reverse. The shelf is just metal, and you're supposed to put magnets on the thing. So I kind of retrofitted a shelf where I took a piece of plastic card and I put magnets in it so that I could, because these miniatures had been made this way a million years ago, and I still bring some of these to conventions. I used to wrap this one in bubble wrap, and this would bend every time. And I got worried that one time it would just, you know. So I now only bring it if I'm bringing my big miniature case and can attach it with either. Well, I'm paranoid. I do both. So I'll have the magnet, and then I'll surround it with like a whole bunch of sticky tack. So I don't know if I'd put this one in diorama, because this is like kind of straight out of the box, other than I added the little bead necklaces. But this may be a good example to talk about going big, because that's a problem that I find comes up a lot in feedback, is people being too subtle with stuff. Like you're doing OSL or transparent cloth, or you're telling a story or something like that. And to you, you're sitting there working on it, you know, like how I am in a regular show, and you and I are both looking at it for hours, really close up and under good light. That's not how people are experiencing it at a contest, or when they're looking at it on their curio shelf or whatever. They're not seeing it upside down the way you do. Although judges will look at upside down. That's like another feedback thing for later. So it's really easy when you're sitting there painting things for hours and you think it's too obvious and you'll pull it back, or you just won't push it as far as you need to. It's like if you look at the light side and the dark side, it's almost a completely different color scheme. I mean, what I did to make it easier for myself is it's the same colors, but on this side I was adding like notes of yellow and orange to those colors, and then on this side I just added like blue liner or something to all the colors to make the moonlit side. But But, you know, it should be, something like this should work, that even if this lamp pole weren't there, you could still figure out that there's light shining on her. The shadow really helps with OSL. Having more stuff in an OSL scene really helps, because it gives you other things to have light reflecting from and make shadows and stuff like that. But in theory, you should be able to do OSL where you can tell that there's a light source even if there isn't anything else in the scene. Like any light source that's actually in the scene. What's that? Oh, let's go to the Wayback Machine. So this is pretty soon after I started painting. So this is like a Warhammer Quest goblin, I'm gonna say. A Warhammer Quest goblin. And I took away his bow and made this like very bad weightlifting thing. He's supposed to be... See, I don't actually know the Smurfs that well. I kind of look stuff up for Brawny Smurf. I'm gonna say Brawny Smurf. And then that's the cat. It's like Brawny Smurf got enlarged. And that's Azrael the cat. And then I guess the mushrooms got enlarged too. Am I really good at thinking through dioramas? Clearly I am not. But I do make them very compact. This is the lid of a cat food tree thing at the time. I didn't know about bases and plinths and how people were doing all that stuff. It was much harder this is going to be like at least 18 years ago. This is one of the miniatures I painted the most. This is one of the little Reaper familiars. And I used him on at least 3 things, if not more. He just keeps being useful to things that I want to do. So even though I made the mushrooms and the barbell, again, this is not really in the spirit of open. This is a diorama. It maybe doesn't make sense, but it does go in the diorama category, or painters if I want. What else? Here's another diorama where I thought I had a cool idea, but maybe I didn't. I don't know. These are not Reaper miniatures. Well, the pumpkin is Reaper, I think. This is Weird, and this is Hassle-Free. Well, I don't know that Weird even makes these anymore. This is back when Weird made metal miniatures. So the idea is that the little kid is the scary monster in this, and that's why he's running away. And he dropped all his candy. That is just like cut up pieces of wire coating and stuff. And this is supposed to be, like, he came like this, and I sculpted that, like, I don't know, he was so scared his antler fell off. I don't know. Gray Mustard has painted the kitty cat recently, too. There's a lot of the cats that came out later with the cat lady Edna that I really like, too. But that guy, he's just, I don't know, that little paw up makes him work for a lot of dioramas, I think. And there's, I don't know if you can see, there's a little Hello Kitty on her thing. And this is back when I was like really petrified about freehand. So it does this, I just left the base plain to look like the road. And then this is cork, and then that's whatever. And is that a good base? No, probably not. But there were 2 different ones in the familiar packs. Yeah, what was the other cat doing? I don't know, but I never ended up finding that cat as applicable to dioramas as paw up cat. This is another, I entered this in diorama at Gen Con, and I would go up to the case and not be able to find it. Like, it was so small that even I didn't know where it was. This has a lot of problems in it. It might be worth critiquing at great length sometime, but we'll just leave that for now. Here's another kind of compact diorama vignette. Although, again, these are not Reaper miniatures. This is another example of people feel like elaborate bases, and I've seen some very, like, mine are far from the kind of construction that I've seen done on bases, but it really, I can only think of 1 or 2 examples where it might be reasonable to put in open. For the most part, just doing base stuff is not in the spirit of open, and you have to do like actual sculpting and whatnot. These are some very badly sculpted presents. And that this is even, I wanted a cardboard box. This is a piece of cork that I scratched out to kind of look like it was open, and then shoved a little piece of tissue paper into. And then you can do some neat stuff with paper. So that one, I never did say how I fixed the canopy. I didn't like. So this is it paper or paper towel? I think it's paper towel. No. Oh, it's tissue paper again. But if you completely coat it with like white glue, you know, like Elmer's school glue mixed with water, you can get it, like this is rigid. So I formed these while it was, you know, still pliable while it was coated with the glue, and then it cures like really sturdily. So you can do some pretty cool things with tissue paper, actually. That is something that the people over in the historical communities do a lot. And then in this case, I made the wrapping paper. I painted a piece of tissue paper and then I ripped it, so you'd get that, because you know how wrapping paper, it's like it's only printed on the outside and you see those little white edges. So by painting it first and then ripping it up, I got that effect. This would work for diorama, and this is an example of you can use, you know, things straight out of the box and tell a story if it works. That was, so there's one of the things that comes up for the Reaper Christmas, the 12 days of Reaper, is there's a little penguin that's got a package next to his feet, and I did this again. And it's an interesting example. I have a picture of it somewhere. Because even, you know, you see it looking in black and white or from distance, you can tell that those are like little candy canes on the paper. And then this one is just stripes, so it's just Christmassy colors. You can get what's going on even from a distance. It still has some visual impact. And the one I did on the penguin, like the penguin's about this tall, maybe it goes up to there. So the package is very small. And I did a lighter green background, so there was less contrast between the background and the candy canes. And then they're like super tiny. So it looks great in the photo. It actually doesn't look as good in person. So you can get too fiddly with detail. I guess is what I'm trying, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm probably boring you all, but okay, this weirdly kind of, this is in the spirit of open. I'm not saying it's going to win a gold medal, but this is in the spirit of open. This was another one for that Iron Painter. What was the theme? Clearly something with death and coldness. But I'm blanking on. Isn't that funny? But anyway, I made the snowman, and like that's a real piece of wood, and I got a skeleton arm, and then there's like a skeletal face and ribs embedded in there, and I made, it's too bad. This method of making icicles works really well, but I think you can see how yellow that has become over the years. So that is 2-part, it's like 5-minute epoxy glue. And I figured out how to make icicles out of it and do some other things, but unfortunately it goes yellow. So it doesn't end up being a great answer for ice. And what I did here, which I think was probably just pouring clear acrylic stuff, also is that like this was level when made, and it subsided and shrunk over time. And I have a few things that look like that. So that was me trying to do 1 part water instead of doing resin stuff. And I think maybe there's 1 part water that works now with the UV. But at the time, if you really wanted to make good water, you had to use resin. And I never did. So I have a few things like this. So yes, then there's a body in the water, and I made all the little plants and stuff. So this is in the spirit of open. I would not necessarily expect amazing prizes because this is not great. But I would not be ashamed to enter that into open. This guy, I don't know, I'm a little on the fence. Some of these, so these are marks from I used to use a blue thing instead of this, or a white thing instead of this. It should come off if I think if I got the putty. warmer it would come off. But anyway, I mean, the nice thing about doing stuff that's on bases is I can just repaint that base. No problem. So this guy and his, and it's just really like almost impossible to see his face, regardless of how you take. He's another one that's got the metal things on. He comes like this with the little staff. I added the underpants, and then these little pigs come like they are, but all of their racing equipment was added, and it's actually Kinder Egg toys. So I'm from Canada. Kinder Eggs are legal there. And when I moved here, for some reason, when I moved from Canada to the United States, I thought it was worth bringing like a gallon bag worth of Kinder Egg toys with me that I collected for my entire life. And then the one thing I've done with them in this entire time is make this diorama. So yeah. This is an example of like the OSL effect is probably a little too subtle. That it's supposed to look like it's reflecting a little off their butts. But, you know, I did take the time to, and this is the kind of thing they would look at in ordnance too. I don't think these would apply for ordnance because they're made of organic things. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever put this in. I might have to bring it to ordnance and confound my fellow judges. But I ran the wheels through the stuff that I used to make the base while it was wet so that it took the impressions. And that's the kind of thing that's good to do in ordnance with like tank treads and stuff like that. And then these, I bet someone in chat can guess what these are. So I'll just leave that in suspense for a minute. But let's look at them in the, and this, I have a whole series of pictures somewhere where I was working out the composition for this and getting it down to be this compact instead of having like a long, you know, rectangular thing where he's in one place and they're, you know, further back. Like I have all these pictures where I was just kind of arranging the pieces on my desk to figure out how to do it, and doing it by vertical levels ended up being a more effective and compact method for storytelling. So and that's really easy. Like I often overlook the vertical, but that can make things a lot more interesting if you have things happening at different heights. Don't just think about the XY axis of your base, but think about the Z axis and stuff going on here at different levels. That if you look at Michael Proctor's pieces, dioramas, and even just something he's, you know, proctored up the base on, you'll see he does that a lot. Like he's really good at that. And that was a rare occasion where I didn't completely suck at that. And I will say that, I should mention that, in addition to Jason sculpting the little mole for me, taking pity on me, Michael gave me the bark, and he was also advising me, because the sadness of my bases just continually amazes Michael, I think. So he tries to help me do things like think about the vertical, which is going on here too. So there's something low down happening, there's something kind of in the middle, there's something up here. There's stuff happening at different heights as well as different area. What else could I show you? You know, I'm struggling to remember whether I actually put this in open when I did it, or if I put it in painters, because this is a conversion. I don't know if I'd call it an extensive conversion. And this is another one where I'm gonna see if anyone in chat, you might have one of these in your pocket right now. Although they are becoming rarer. So I will put this one to the side for a minute. So this is kind of what they would call a flat, or it's like a bas relief. This is not really a true flat, but it's the concept of a flat, which are welcome at MSP Open. And there's a variety of ways to display those. So, this is useful to show. So that's kind of the category thing. If you have more questions, or if you have any questions about categories. Actually, here, I'll show this as an example of something That's the kind of base that people might feel like it should go in open, but doesn't really. So these are, again, weird miniatures that are probably no longer available because they're metal. This is a slight conversion of the pose, and I had to like drill out a part, and then I assembled all this base stuff. And this part is this I got from a book from the historical miniatures people on making dioramas or something. But what this is like, this is a sheet of plastic and this is melted wax underneath it. Now in their example, and it probably works a little better, they completely surrounded the water so that, you know, you can see the edge like that and see behind the curtain. But it's like you take it, you put a cloth on it or something, and you melt it with an iron, and then it sort of cracks and it looks like ice, which is pretty cool. The snow that I used on this one is called Eileen's True Snow, ALENE''S. I got it at the craft store. I've seen it on Amazon as well. I like it because it's pretty sturdy. So it's kind of like frosting almost. So you just get it on your brush and kind of dab it on things. So it's not too hard to put it on like the trees like that. And this little tree thing isn't sturdy enough to use on a gaming piece, but this snow is. Like I would have no qualms about using this snow on a gaming piece. So that's one of the things. I like it. It travels well. I mean, if a little bit chips off, it's not the end of the world. I guess let's see if we can give them the... I don't think he's light enough. For being an ice guy, I think the highlights should be way more dramatic. And this is definitely an example of going big, not going big. This is the kind of thing that I would be advising someone else on now. So the idea that she shot him, and there's this bullet hole, and it goes through, and there's a little bit of stuff on the grass. You probably didn't even see that until I mentioned it. So it's way too subtle. Like I should have had gushing, used fishing line and had gushing blood coming out and had like a big wound and either made his blood like way lighter or way darker than the rest of him instead of just being like another shade of that blue. Also something that contrasted with the base a little more would have worked well too. I very much suspect that I used that epoxy again because you can see it is sort of greenish, and I think it was bluer, and it's just the effect of it yellowing over time that makes it look greenish. I'm not sure if I might have adjusted her posing a little bit too, but again, that isn't even really conversion. Like I didn't cut anything apart and put it back together again. I just bent metal. But the wax thing is cool. If anyone wants to steal that one. So that is very much a diorama entry, but very much not an open entry. So what else is cool to talk about? This is more of a general contest thing, but sometimes it's good to be adaptable. So as a general contest rule, see, you can't tilt it. See why we say it would be obvious that those weren't attached to the base. Although I probably would blue tack them if I were bringing. I didn't because that's the story I'm going to tell you. So this was originally entered in Gen Con in the unit category. I painted these for a board game. They're not actually from a board game. They're from Heresy Miniatures. I did not like the pieces that came in the board game, and Heresy had these that kind of, we ended up selling the game. We didn't like the game, but I kept the miniatures. It's like a game where you're on a spaceship and you're having to do repairs, and so each person in the team has different abilities. And then there are these different colors. So I kept them the colors that they are in the game, and I gave them the numbers that they have in the game. And then the rest of their outfits, I did all the same so that they, looked like a unit. And I put them, this is that preformed plastic card stuff, again, which I did not merge into the base very well, but, for a game, it's fine. So I'm like, this is going to be my one chance to ever enter something in unit, because I paint so slow and I don't really do that. And I'd been entering the Gen Con contest for years at that point. And the rules had never had anything about having to have a movement tray or have them all on a unified base or anything. And that year they changed it because it was so difficult for the contest staff to handle the thing. Because, it's like 5 loose miniatures or 10 or however many are in your unit. So not weird that they changed the rules, but I was unaware of it. Rules weren't as easy to, disseminate online, or I didn't read them, because that'll happen. Like, you'll read something and you'll forget, or you'll get it mixed up with something from somebody else's contest. So I kind of recommend reading the rules when you're planning your entry, then read them again as you're working on your entries to make sure that you're complying. But also just stay adaptable. So the rule changed, but it really did just have to be something they could move stuff around on. And people were doing paper plates, and I'm like, well, I don't know, I don't want to just do a paper plate. So I went down to the vendor hall and I found this thing from Gale Force 9. And then I don't typically paint at a convention like that. Like, I'll paint at ReaperCon because it's, everybody's painting and sitting around. But something like Gen Con, it's really hard to carry the stuff with you. So I didn't have like anything. There's a paint and take, and they were like, yeah, sure, you can take some black paint. But I'm like, well, what, I'm like, this is the paintbrush you get at paint and take. I'm going to be here all year. Somebody had some junky old like 1/2-inch brush, but it still wasn't working very well. I ended up doing it with paper towel. I ended up painting this with paper towel, and I was all covered with paint by the end of it. But I got them there. I got them entered in the contest, and I won second place with this. Which, obviously, this is a few years ago, and I probably, the things people enter in unit now are kind of mind-boggling. But so there's the distance view. And there's an example of, like, sometimes how color values, the value of colors is different than we think they are. So this blue is maybe a little lighter than it looks like it is, but this red is probably darker than it looks like it is. Because we tend to know this camera wants things at a very particular distance to focus on them. I'm hoping to paint more board game pieces, actually, because my husband has a game he's very excited about. It's not called Al Capone, but it's like running a mob in Chicago, and there's like all these different mob bosses and stuff. And the minis are pretty cool. And now that there's like contrast and super washes and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, it might be feasible for me to paint things and not take 1,000 years. So ReaperCon, and probably some of these other, even the military conventions that do that. Here, I'll just show this lady again for some reason. The medal style, they often also have special awards. And special awards are going to be more like, there's just one trophy, or there's 3. So special awards at ReaperCon include manufacturer awards, which includes Reaper as a manufacturer. So there's the Sophie trophies, where there's, bronze, silver, gold trophies for each of the categories I mentioned. So for ordnance, what does ordnance count? Now I'm blanking on that. You might want to check the rules on that, because they did and then they didn't. I don't know. But definitely for diorama, open, and painters, there are also Sophie trophies. And then there's, Dark Sword is sponsoring awards, and they have like really nice trophies and cash prizes and stuff like that. And then Bombshell is sponsoring awards, and Moonlight minis. And if I were smart, I would have looked at the email before I did this, and I didn't. But if you go to reapercon.com and go to the MSP rules, it will show you the other people that are sponsoring awards. I think there's a Chibi one, but the other Reaper ones, there's Large Monster, which I actually don't really have an example of, even though this is a very large figure. Here she is next to so 4 scale. It is monster. It's creature. The point is, it's very hard for like Cthulhu or a squid or whatever. Gorloth, is that the squid's name? It's hard for those figures and even some of the dragons to compete with something that has a face and you can have a lot of expression and emotion. So the point of this award is for people who enjoy painting those. They're challenging to paint. They don't always get enough recognition in contests. So that is the point of that award. I mean, this guy is probably the closest I have, and he's not nearly big enough to be considered for that. But, while I was dragging stuff out to show you, I thought I'd drag him out too. This is one of the things that I painted for Ron that he was like, why? Why is it this color? I hate it. So I painted him another one. Green users, how large is large? What an excellent question. You know what? I'm going to go look up the rules because that is... I mean, it's larger than an ogre, I think. But I'm wondering how it is actually phrased. I gotta scroll down to the special awards. Giant size monster. Look at us not apparently being very specific about that, but giant sized. I mean, that is a giant. I will try to remember to mention this to Michael, who is the MSP contest director. Like, I think you probably have to be like around this size. But it's like the mid-sized dragons count. So it's like the mid-sized dragons, giants. So I don't think I don't think this guy, where is he? This guy, I don't think is big enough. These two, if we get to 4 scale, that they're really not that much bigger. But I feel like, I don't know if she would count for size, but she's not a monster, is where she would be not considered. But I will attempt. Pendrick says 100 millimeter is giants. I bet we've discussed this before, because usually before Crow's Nest changed format, and maybe he will still do this, I don't know, we would do a show where we tried to answer some of the MSP open questions and help guide people with the categories and stuff like that. So probably I once knew the answer to this and I no longer do, but I feel like it should absolutely be on this page, or there should be some more, like whether they mean giant in terms of whatever the D&D definitions are, which seems weird because Reaper's pretty system agnostic. But while I'm here, I can confirm the other special awards. So there's Bombshell, Moonlight, Talon Games sponsors Cav. So those would be able to be entered in the ordnance category, and then they'd also be considered for the special Cav awards, which is individual, squad, and diorama. DGS Games also sponsors an award. Midnight Heroes. And they sponsor the Chibi Award, so it doesn't have to be by them. They just like chibis. So anything chibi, that includes the Bonesylvanians. I don't think Mouselings would count as chibi, but the Bonesylvanians, and I feel like there were, the Pathfinder chibis, they would count. Then Southpaw's Crafts and Streamers Painting Contest, which category 1 is Holly Monster and Fern. Category 2 is the Overgourd. So that's there too. Warlord Games and Trent's Works are also sponsoring some. Then the other Reaper one is Mouseling, where I have one whole Mouseling example. Because the other Mouselings that I painted, Ron has all of them. So I don't anticipate that this guy would necessarily win an award, but he would be eligible because he's a Mouseling. So it doesn't have to only be Mouselings. There's often dioramas with the Mouselings. Often there's some really cool entries in Mouselings. It could be a very competitive category because the trophy is super cool, and I like desperately crave one, but apparently not enough to actually try to make a Mouseling entry. Because it's like a Mouseling, it's like Mouseling Napoleon is the trophy. It's really cool. The Giant Monster trophy is cool too. And so is Sophie. And then some of the sponsors are giving out dog tags or coins or stuff like that. So manufacturer awards are definitely worth looking at in a traditional style contest too, because they don't tend to be as aggressive, like especially for smaller manufacturers. They don't tend to be entered as aggressively, and it's like, so you're getting a better chance of winning something, but you're also helping out the company that you like, helping people see nice examples of what their figures look like painted, and kind of help drive more interest for their figures. So what else can I show you? Oh, that is something that people don't really think about a lot. So I showed you a unit. You could totally enter a unit as a single entry. Like I could enter that unit at ReaperCon as a single entry. And because this is one I did last year. So this isn't even a unit. This is a role-playing character from a game that we were playing with Bobby Jackson. And you could have a pack mule or something, but I couldn't afford a pack mule. So I bought a sheep. And I was trying to talk Bobby into letting me make it a pack sheep, and he was having none of my nonsense. But I painted this. I had some compelling argument that I no longer recall. So I painted this up with the sheep and entered this. And the title of this was, so that Anne would read this out when they were... well, I was hoping this one would get picked so that Anne would read it out, because the title was "This is my pack sheep, Bobby Jackson." And because it did get judged for a medal, he has allowed me to turn this into a pack sheep. We haven't played that game since then, but hopefully that's not why, because I got my pack sheep authorized into the game. I don't know if we ended it or we just haven't done it again. Bobby likes to do different systems and stuff, or different characters. We end up in different situations. Or we have another game that we've been playing long term with a different GM. And that game has not ended yet. But Bobby typically will come when he has some other thing that he wants to try. Oh, and in case anyone's interested, this figure was sculpted by Jen Haley, the painter, who is also Jen Haley, the sculptor, and Anne posed for it. So this is a very this little miniature has a lot of history, and it was. I might have got. I think I got a new version of this. I had originally painted this in a class at Reaper. I wasn't teaching the class, I was taking the classes before I taught classes even. And then eventually, 4 million years later, I actually painted the whole figure. So yes, if you have like your adventuring party or a unit or some other reason that you would have multiple figures, a collection of board game figures, do not feel compelled to enter them as individual items, especially if there have been years where we've had someone it was a unit and everybody's painted like with the same colors and the same style and the same techniques, and they entered it as like 10 different things. It's like either pick one or two or enter them as a group. Like you don't have to enter them all individually. That was you filling out a lot of forms, and then everybody else has to fill out a lot of stuff too. So it's not obvious, I don't think, from the rules, but things that have multiple parts that are not attached are still eligible. So did anyone identify this? The original sculpt before I modified it? I should have gone and found one and brought it with me, but I didn't think about that. We'll do another example of this. This is 2 examples and some stories. So the original figure, I think she has a wand in her hand, and then this is another one of the familiars, but he's on a little rock or something. So I had to like scrape off all the rock and the wand and then attach him to her hand, which for me is like a lot of conversion, but for like a normal person. It's probably not. And I made the mushrooms. I did not make the ferns. Those are brass etch. I think they're just called etched brass or brass etched. And so you get it, and it's really brass. It's like really shiny, like a penny. But you can paint it and shape it a little bit. And this, back when Reaper did like the traditional top 3 type contest, I actually won. So then this is long ago, because this is not amazing. Best in show with this. But it was very close contention, because Anne thought I had not dry brushed the grass. I hadn't paid enough attention to things. And I had. I just didn't do it enough. That when I talk about going big and you think that something's over exaggerated, like either I should have used more of a yellowy green, or I think I used like a whitish green to kind of go with her outfit. And maybe it just wasn't apparent, but you rarely are you over exaggerating something. Like I feel like it's with contrast. It's the same. It started with contrast, but this very much also applies to effects like OSL and stuff like that. People will kind of inch up. You'll come to something like ReaperCon, or you'll post something online, and people will say it needs more contrast. And so you try just pushing a little more contrast next time. You're pushing, and it's just so baby steps, and it takes you forever to get anywhere, and you get the same feedback year after year. This was my experience, at least. So what I suggest to people is just go the other way. Like, just push it to the point where you think it's ridiculous, where the source light is gonna, like, people are gonna need to wear sunglasses to look at your piece. Or, transparent cloth, paint like wet t-shirt. Contrast, just make it crazy. Just crazy contrast. Because what is gonna feel over exaggerated and crazy to you, you're probably getting halfway to where you're supposed to be. Because you have to adjust your eyes and your perception of your own work, as well as like the technical parts of doing it. And I feel like you'll get there faster. If someone says that's too much, like if people start saying, oh, that's too much, that OSL is insane, dial it down. So you can do that. You can go back the other way. But like until someone's saying that, you aren't overdoing it. So that's interesting how much lighter the little mushroom stems look in the monochromatic view, isn't it? Because I don't feel like they're standing out and going raw. And in case anyone wants to make mushrooms, these are pins. So the littlest ones are just pins straight out of the package, and then these ones I added green stuff on top of to make bigger pins. And if you really want to get creative, and I think I did it on a few of them, but I can't remember now for sure, you can kind of try to use pliers or something to make the stems a little less, stock straight like a mechanical manufactured object is. I entered this guy the same year, and he's definitely an example of not enough. Like I was going for a fall thing, and I felt like this was really, this was very high contrast, the red leaves. And it's so not. And it wasn't even like, I noticed this 2 months later, like I understood it. So that's why my big piece of advice for today, this is a similar sculpted mushroom thing. I just did a whole tall mushroom cone. Is start your entries now. If you're planning on painting something specific for any, like if you're going to Nova or whatever thing, if you're doing the quarterly contest, start now. Start way in advance. Like make a schedule. Find some way to make it urgent to yourself. Because I know for a lot of us, like last minute painting is a very classic thing to do. I have friends who painted in the hotel room. It's never worked for me. I hear the bathroom is the place with the best light, but my attempt to do it, needle nose pliers, Hendrik says, for bending the pin. That will work well. And because what you need is time to put it aside and come back and look at it again and figure out on your own before you take it to the contest and someone tells you that this is not enough contrast to look like, you know, really nice fall leaf canopy. That there should be way more orange and yellow and stuff up here, and it would be more interesting. Those, you will start making those kinds of observations, but you usually need time away from the miniature. That's why, if you've been watching regularly, the things that I've painted on and I come back and I work on it again, another show, I almost always say, well, now that this has been sitting on my shelf for a week or two, I wish I'd done this, or I need to do more of that, or I think that. And I'm able to do that because I'm not like crunching to write the essay the night before. I'm taking some time. I put it down. I get to look at it for a while, because the way you look at things when you're making versus when you're viewing is different. It's a different mode of looking at things, and it's really hard. You kind of get in the, you're drilling down sometimes to small problems like blending, or you get kind of like, oh, I need to get the eyes right, or whatever thing, and you start missing the big picture. And it's when you pull back and you give yourself some time to spend with something, just looking, or even you don't look at it for a while and then you come back and look at it again. And that's when you start seeing stuff like if we're looking at the value structure of this guy, it is not great. I should have brought in either making it more yellow here maybe, or made it a lot lighter in color, or done something else to bring more attention to the face area, as well as that's a pretty boring fall canopy thing. And all of those things, it's not just that it's been, oh look, there's the sticker from what number entry it was in Dark Heaven Large, I'm guessing, is what this was in. And it did not win anything, I don't think. Did it? That's the thing about being incredibly old and having no memory. Who knows? I don't think it did. Which is perfectly reasonable, given the things that I'm telling you. But I started noticing a lot of these things pretty soon after I painted, pretty soon after I came home from the convention and had the miniature sitting in my cabinet looking at it. It's not just that it's, 17 years later and I'm better at this. But building your ability to critique stuff, which you start honing on looking at other people's things. And by critique, I don't just mean, hi, Hellspawn. This was the original Mossbeard, which does anyone know if he's still on the Reaper site? I mean, this is metal. Even the base is metal. So he is heavy, and I shudder to think what this would cost in today's dollars. So that's the other way you can tell it was like 16 or 17 years ago, because I bought a giant metal miniature for what was, I'm sure, a very reasonable price at the time. What else can I show you? So, I was going to talk about base in painters, because people are like, when they get their feedback, they'll say like, how come the judges were talking about my base? I thought base didn't count in painters category. And it's like, base can add, it's $24.99. Wow, that's actually not terrible. And 14209 is the SKU number of that metal tree bird. Hellspawn, you are correct. There's a plastic version now, which I think is bigger than that, isn't it? I think it's bigger than that one even. But this was so long ago, Reaper did not make plastic miniatures then. This is a Darksword miniature, which is one of the sponsoring companies for ReaperCon this year. But we'll use this as an example of a base. So in painters, the base can count against you slightly, be a neutral factor, or count for you slightly. This would either be neutral or maybe count a little, since I painted the sense of light continues on the base so that it's coherent with the figure. But it's not like there's great texture or cool stone or whatever. This is like a super plain base. This is how I base. When I'm not screwing it up. When I try, then I make it worse. This is also, like, this would be fine. This would not be counted against you in painters, the fact that this is a This is even an unpainted piece of plastic. So there's a story here too. But so yes, it's a bust, but let's pretend it's not a bust. Let's pretend it was this giant and I just put her on a plain black base. That'd be fine. That doesn't count against you. It doesn't count for you. It doesn't count against you. If you do stuff on the base, like if you have like this lady that I showed before, adding all of these things gave me the opportunity to paint additional textures and stuff. So there's no freehand on her, but there's freehand on these little jars. There's more non-metallic metal on the baskets. I painted this burlap texture. I painted the orange texture. Like I researched what the bottom of baked bread looks like to paint those because the bottoms were going to show. So it's painters. So those are all opportunities for me. You know, then there's rocks and stuff. Paint different textures and effects and stuff. So that's going to count a little for you in painters. That's how a base can help you in painters. So it can be like a neutral factor, or it can help you where it's going to count against you. And I don't really have an example of this because I learned to do this pretty quickly. Oh, I should have brought my bat, I guess. Like if you don't paint the basing materials. Or like it's like if she was floating above the base, which actually I do have one that's doing that because I need to fix her. Where'd she go? So if you look at that foot, it's no longer attached, and it doesn't, you know, it ruins the effect. It looks less real because that's not what would be happening. Or you've got like a pin showing. So just kind of poor construction and not painting the base is gonna be where a base could count against you in painters. Greymaster says, comparatively, since it came up at the same time, the Cobalt Learn to Paint kit is $35.99 with 8 paints, 6 minis, and a paintbrush. So yes, it's the paints and the paintbrush that are a big part of the expense there. Although I think if you price those kits out, isn't it a little cheaper than buying everything individually? So why is he, and okay, speaking of, yeah, so this is not ideal, but this happened, so I went to the Atlanta Miniature Figure Show, and with the figure shows that are really just shows where they don't have a convention element, they will sometimes have someone come in and do a workshop, like the 2 or 3 days before the convention. Like you have to pay for this. I mean, it's not cheap. But so this was with Fernando Ruiz, and we painted this and then just like a few things on a 54mm guide. But we got pretty close to done on him. Like when we were painting the cloth, I think we just did like one shoulder or something. But we had the conference room that we were doing this in for like another 4 hours after the class ended. And I'm like, well, I'm so close to done. Like I feel like if I just kind of cram this 4 hours, I can finish his jacket, and I can enter this. But it was just on the stick. I'm like, well, I don't have a base or anything. And a friend of mine that was taking it had these. And I'm like, that's great. I got a paper clip. I got some poster tack. I can make this work. This was also the other day when we were talking about, I went back and tried Viejo paints again. This was the example. So if you see how shiny his beard is, I don't seal my miniatures as a rule, and this is definitely, I finished it at a thing and then entered it, so he was never sealed. That is because for whatever reason the orangey brown paint was like super shiny, but the skin's nice and matte. So I don't know. So I mean, it painted a nice miniature, but it doesn't have the feel that I prefer working with. Hellspawn is asking whether I prefer busts or full miniatures. I actually have not painted other busts, and I should. But most of the time when I paint, it's for Ron at Reaper. or for dark sword. So I paint what they ask me to paint, which is usually a full figure. Because I am such a pure painter, like I get it's very rare for me to enjoy the process of trying to make a base and do all the accessories and things. And usually when I do, it's like I put a lot of effort in and I think it's gonna achieve goals that it doesn't end up achieving. So the risk reward ratio is really low for me. That I should just be painting busts because I just want to paint. I don't want to construct scenes and tell stories. Like I'm very bad at all of those things and I'm too lazy to do it. Like I think it's cool. Like when I first started painting miniatures, I wanted to do a lot of dioramas. I had all these ideas and stuff. But in terms of what do I enjoy doing when I just sit down and paint? I enjoy paint. I enjoy experimenting with effects and textures. And like this guy, it wasn't part of the workshop to give him like all these age spots and that. I was like, I'm going to go look at some old bald people online. And I'm like, yeah, age spots, that'll be cool. So I added that. And, you know, then the kind of doing the leather texture and stuff like that. This was a few years ago, back before like we were all doing textures and whatnot. So that, you know, we're playing with color. Like this was me before. I mean, now I do traditional painting too, so I do a lot more color mixing, but I wasn't very conversant with color mixing, so I picked out like a split complementary palette plus a couple of secondary colors, if you're familiar with that. So it was basically like 10 or 12 colors, and I mixed everything myself. And that was kind of the challenge on this miniature. Like this started at a convention where I was just sitting in between. I was working at paint and take table, but it's like the nature of this convention, there would be periods where like nothing much was happening. And then I just liked how it was coming out well enough to finish it up later. Gray Mouser, for sure. I'm just saying there's probably more value in that cobalt kit than the metal moss beard, which is really priced well for being metal. Yeah, I have to wonder if they like missed raising the price of that when the price of metal went crazy pants. But it is kind of fun with some of the basing stuff too. It's like, you know, it seems goofy and lame, but like pouring out Kool-Aid or something to try to figure out what it looks like when you spill stuff. And then at the time, this was very hard for me. I wanted to make like broken crockery, and I'm like, I was just trying to figure out how to do it. And I don't know that I achieved it really well. And I get the impression that, yeah, I think there was another piece glued there that has now come off. But it was like an interesting challenge, like doing those little Christmas presents was an interesting challenge, but I'm bad at it. Zachariah, I am. Same. I like the idea of stories, but I never seem to do them. Yeah, it's a lot of work, and I have a short attention span, I guess. So, and this is an example of like, this is just the base, the metal parts. The base the miniature comes with, and then I glued it on one of these plastic display bases, and I just kind of painted it with some of the same colors. This would not count against you at all in painters. I mean, I don't think it would count for me because I'm not painting as a particular texture or anything, but it would not count against you. This is a pretty old miniature as well. This is Lilith from the Ptolus, Ptolus world setting. And this is, I probably should have painted the base lighter because it's really hard to tell, but there's blood on the end of her dagger, and then it's dripping a little bit behind her as she walks away. And I think, did I file them all? So she came with sculpted eyebrows, and they were like a lot for a lady. So I think I filed them off and just painted on eyebrows. But this was one of those times when sometimes you like see something that someone did on YouTube, or you take a class or a workshop or something like that, and you try something new. I always had, we'll look at the value thing on that, because I'm like, if I have the second camera, why not do it? I had a really bad habit of like, I'd try something once or twice and then just sort of go back to doing what I did before. So if I'd gone down this path I think I would have figured out a bunch of stuff a lot sooner than I did, and it would have been good because I was playing around with unification of color schemes, and like there's yellow in the highlights, and then there's this bluey purple color is in the shadows of everything. There's just a lot of stuff that I did here that I do now, but you know, there were like 10 years in between before it's like I had to relearn something I could have learned if I'd just done more than one. I'll do a mini like they did in that class and then just not think about it again. Gray Mouser. Oh, no, Babachook 4. I might be well out of date, but they said they wouldn't do price raises with old stock. Does that mean that they're not going to make more moss beards if they run out? No, all of the accessories on her are also metallic. Different color, though, I think. This is like a gold or a bronze. And then this is steel. These may have been, I think that this was also the figure where, or a figure where I was experimenting with the Privateer Pest P3 paints right after they came out. Because that was, they had this like cool dark teal color that's the dark blue, and then I was mixing it with the dark magenta that they had too. I think I should write some stuff down maybe. I don't think I've ever painted a piece where I combined metallics and non-metallics on the same piece. I've heard people say they've done it. What I would prefer to do is paint metallics using the same principles that I use to paint non-metallic metal. Let me see if I can find an example actually. Does she might have it. And this is actually sort of funny. So this is another Darksword miniature, and when I entered this at ReaperCon, Jim from Darksword later asked me if I wanted to sell it to him for the Darksword collection. And so he'd seen it at the con, but then I think I took pictures later, and he's like, did you go home and repaint that as metallics? And I'm like, no, I did not. It was metallics the whole time. But because it's painted with the same principles, with shaded metallics, demi-metallics. I've heard people refer to it different ways. So the shading is done with matte paints, and it's where I want it. And then depending on how hardcore I'm being about it, I will also add highlights on like the part you want to be the really, really shiny hotspot reflection. If you take like a very light silver, or even if I'm being very dramatic about it, Viejo has an alcohol silver that's like super shiny bright, and you can put just like a little dot of that. So you can see that it is still in my possession, and Jim's collection for Darksword is exclusively non-metallic metal. And I'm not entirely sad. This was another miniature. This was an old class miniature. And a friend of mine asked me how I'd done some other figure that had like the texture. And I think he asked me about skin, so I was showing him how to do that. And then I was like, well, I've like painted half the miniature. So then I'm like, well, I'm always so fearful about doing freehand. I'm really going to push myself to do the freehand, and I had to figure something out for this like weird shape shield, and it looks better on camera actually. It looks like there's more contrast to it on camera, but it's not, I mean, it's not terrible, but you can kind of see there. Can we get this camera is so, but you can see that there's not a lot of contrast between the red and the green, because you can barely even see it in the black and white version. And then this was actually before I was very good at, this is one of the figures I learned to paint shaded metallics on. So I had painted the metallics really crappy, and then I brought it to ReaperCon and sat with Michael Proctor, and it looks like she's got chips. And he showed me how to make it better. So speaking of stuff like chips, so if I saw this as a contest judge, I would probably assume this happened during transport, and I would not hold it against you. So there's like construction and detail orientedness, workmanship. I don't know how to describe it, but one of the things that I think people sometimes don't think about when they're first starting to enter contests is kind of craft is a big part of what we do. So like cleaning up the base edge when like, you know, this is supposed to look like carpet, but it actually was some kind of flock or something. But, you know, if I'd gotten some on the edge, cleaning that off, painting, sometimes you'll have like the bottom of a cloak. Let's see if we can see the bottom of her cloak. And some people just won't even bother to paint it. It might even still be white or whatever. So just kind of, there's like a consistency and a, I don't know, attention to detail. If you've gotten a scratch, you know, I accidentally got a little streak of the brown off the staff on her leg. Like, I should fix that if I'm going to put it in a contest. Stuff like that. This miniature was interesting. I painted this for Crystal Brush, which was what the contest at Adepticon used to be. It was a highly competitive contest because they had high value money prizes for the top 3 winners. Which I would never have expected to be one of. But so I deliberately made her to be a monster large figure entry. I was not trying to get in the fray of single figure. I'm not sure that she was judged in that category. I don't know. But this was another, I was trying to, you know, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to face my freehand. Like, I started with all the freehand on the dress. I think that was the first thing I painted. Maybe I probably painted the skin first. And the skin was actually more painful to paint than the freehand. Like, getting something this big, that smooth without airbrushing was a thing. But the skin is also where I went wrong in a way. Like, it's very, I don't know, she's very sterile, bland. I don't know how I'd put it. Like, there's some different colors and stuff in the skin, and I wanted it to not look like normal human skin, like to not look all full of pores and flaws, like she's not a human being. So I thought that was kind of a way of conveying that. But it needed kind of more dramatic lighting or something. It needed something to give it a little more jazz, I think, is the big problem. So, like, I got all caught up in the freehand because this is all freehand too. I got all caught up in that, and this was kind of before I thought about lighting very much, I think. This was also an example, and I think most painters have an example of that. Because sometimes you'll see the results of a contest and you'll be like, what, were the judges on crack? Like, why did this win instead of that? And sometimes it's consistency. So, like, maybe if this was in competition with another miniature, maybe I did the freehand better. But then if they're looking at the whole miniature, that person made better color choices and they painted overall more consistently. Also, this wood texture was not on the miniature originally. I ran out of time because I hadn't originally planned to enter, and then I think my husband went out of town. I'm like, all right, I've got like 8 days. Let's try to paint an entry. So this stuff looked way more boring. And then when I went back to revise that, I also realized that some of the leather texture wasn't strong enough and some of the non-metallic metal wasn't shiny enough. I remember another friend telling a story about how they spent like all this time on the scales of something, like the body, and then they, you know, the contest was getting closer and they kind of had to like dry brush the legs. And consistency is a factor that the judges can look at. Like, sometimes when a decision doesn't make sense, it may be something like that, where we're looking at the overall thing, not just they did that non-metallic metal and it's amazing. It's like, okay, but did they also finish everything else? It doesn't, and by finished, I don't mean everything has to be the same standard. Like, the problem with this miniature in a way is that it doesn't have a focus. Like, there should be something that's really making you look a particular place on the miniature, and with nothing else going on, that place should be here, and there isn't. So it's almost too consistent. It's like I did apply the same degree of everything to the whole thing. And it would probably be more interesting if there was like a little less going on some places and a little more going on someplace else. But for comparison, so I told you about that other snow. This, and I don't know where to get this now. This was Secret Weapon, and they're no longer in business. But we can compare some snow while I have these things out. So this is that Eileen's True Snow, which is sturdy enough to use for gaming and cheap. This is also sturdy enough for gaming, but challenging for, I don't think it's going to be everyone's choice for applying. So there's a clear part that's just acrylic medium, essentially, I think. And then this, and the reason it's kind of sparkly, is it's crushed glass. But if you breathe that is very, very bad for your lungs. Like, I wore a mask. I closed my door so the cats couldn't get in. I wore a mask to apply that. So it's sturdy. It's not cheap, was the other thing. But you can get it, like I went for kind of a slushier snow, but you kind of have a range of, depending on how much of that medium stuff you use, you have a range from, is it like thick pack snow or slushy snow or melting snow, I guess you probably even could do. And then the other snow that I was pretty unimpressed with this is Snow Flock from Woodland Scenics. So that's, I don't know if you can kind of see it's fuzzy. I do not find it especially convincing at all. This actually, and I forgot to mention that on this other one, because this is something that you can get from Reaper, and I'm not sure where else you can get it really. So I think I've mentioned that you can use the anti-shine additive as frost. Like, if you put too much in, it's going to frost. That's what happens when you use like matte sealer on your miniature and you get like little white stuff. You've either used it too thickly or haven't shaken it enough or something, and you've got like matting agent that's gathering in spots, and it's got this white kind of look. But if you just use it straight up or slightly thinned with water, you can make frost. So that's how I kind of integrated the shore. If I wet this, even now, I think if I wet this brush, I would be able to move it around. I don't think it ever really... It's not really acrylic paint. It's like little particles. Maybe it's got a small amount of acrylic binder. Maybe it's in water. I don't even know. But as far as I know, Reaper is the only company, and I mean like not Golden, not Liquitex, that sells it where you can just buy that matting agent. Instead of, you can buy matte medium, and that's like medium with the matting agent added. Or you can buy matte sealer and stuff like that. But this lets you add just this. Like, if I have a paint that's a little bit too shiny, like that guy's beard, if I'd had this with me, I could have put a little bit of that in, and I wouldn't have like massively decreased the opacity of the paint like it would if I added medium that's clear, and I'd been able to take the shine down. Gray Mouser. A lot of folks prefer plastics. Reaper was putting a lot of metal in their giveaway minis, but now it's mostly bones white. Oh, and I missed a few. Maybe well out of date, but they said this was like a year ago. It could be that is with the price raised, but my impression is metal sells a lot slower. I think it does, and that's partly because it costs more, and partly I think the more and more people come into the hobby via plastics, metal's not like super hard to deal with, but especially if you have to assemble, like if you have to glue stuff together, you do need to pin where you don't need to pin a plastic miniature usually. And I mean, I started with metal, so I don't find it too painful to do, but I could see where it would be off-putting to people who are used to dealing with plastic. Certainly it's heavier. Like if you're gaming with your miniatures, you have a big bin full of metal or you have a big bin full of plastic, you're going to notice that when you're transporting it. You are definitely going to notice that. All right, is there anything cool that I brought over here to show you that I didn't show you? Or anything hideously uncool? Well, here we can... This one has a little story too. So this is... Julie may recognize this because she made it. This is an old, I assume, Relpartha miniature. So I didn't get to play D&D much in high school. I think my dad got me the basic rule, the red box when I was 12 from Sears. This is up in Canada. And I was like super into it, but I didn't live that close to my dad. And none of my friends were very interested. So I'd like get my friends to play a game or two, and then they'd be like, yeah, okay, I'm not that into that. But then whenever I found people who were interested, they weren't interested in me being part of it. So one time it was like my friend's brother was super into D&D, but he just thought that was too lame to, GM for his sister and her friend. And then I asked the group at school, and they were just like, no, we're full. And I have no idea if that's because I was a girl or what, but that's how I didn't actually really get to play until college. Actually, my second time in college. So I did like 2 years of university and didn't love it, quit and got a job, and then went back for something else. And that school had a games club. So I joined the games club and I ended up in this game. And this was the character that I played. And her name was Ren, and she was a bard. So that's where my username is from. It was Ren the Bard was my first like major D&D character. We didn't really use miniatures that much, but I played a few games with my friends as well. And when we went to the store one time, and I was the DM for those games. But when we went to the store, I saw this miniature. I'm like, oh my, this is exactly how I described my character. Like that, like she's not supposed to be that attractive. She's got that exact outfit. Because I think the DM gave her some kind of like clothes where you could change. It was a magic item where you could change what it looked like, but kind of the default was this sort of, gladiator style skirt or something. She had a little pseudo dragon named Trim. And I should have brought the other. I didn't think about it. So a friend of mine in the game painted the miniature, and then so this was like 92 or 93 or something. Then like fast forward 10 years, and I get married and I move to America, and I'm looking for a hobby, and I want to do something with a physical component. I don't want to just always be in my head. So I'm like. But when I thought about doing like crocheting or something like that, I'm like, I don't want all the crap at the end. Like, what am I going to do with a bunch of rug hook pillows or crocheted Afghans or whatever? Like, at a certain point, your friends are like, no, please stop giving me things. So I'm like, miniatures. Miniatures are good because if I give them to people and they hate them, they're very small. And maybe we'll start playing games. So I'm like, yeah, miniatures. And then my husband's like, you know what? I painted miniatures for a little while. And I got this like box in the basement, and it was like an old box you'd put chess pieces in where you like slide the lid off. So it was like a bunch of metal miniatures, original lead, thrown in a box. So I called them the Blobby Knights because most of them had been somewhat worse for wear for having been trapped in this box for a while. But he had a copy of this miniature, the same one that I bought for my character all those years ago. And I'm like, I'm going to wait until I get good, and then I'm going to paint this miniature to really look like my character. Because even at the time in the 90s, I'm like, well, how come you didn't paint the eyes? And he's like, well, you don't paint the eyes. I'm like, okay. But so eventually I'm like, well, I think I'm good enough. I'm going to go paint how I think Ren the Bard should have looked. So this stuff was a different thing. They're all well worth it, I think. Or no, this might be a Reaper. But this was like a tiny little set of familiars I had. And then the Liar is Reaper, I believe. So that is where my username came from. Was Ren the Bard. Which now I think there's an anime thing. There's something out there that they made long after I came up with the name. It's just one of those weird coincidences. Gray Mouser. To me, metal and plastic is just different. I mean, they're definitely different, but... Babatuk. I have some nostalgia for single-piece metal miniatures as a former Eldar player but struggle with pinning. Yeah, pinning is just the worst. I'm very paranoid about it because I'm like terrible with glue. So that's why I had all that 5-minute epoxy, because if I'm going to pin something, that sucker is pinned. If there's a pin, there's 5-minute epoxy. I'm filling the gaps with putty. Whatever I have to do to make that thing stay together, I'm going to do it. Maybe. I always felt I was receiving better value for my cash with metals. I mean, it's like the cost for a company to start making a metal miniature is pretty low, whereas the mold for a plastic miniature is like insane, the cost of it. But then the cost of materials switches. But plastic is just getting better and better. Like, honestly, if you showed 10 years ago me what they can do now, it would be like, what? Babadook, player is a stretch. I was too young to understand the rules. You can still be nostalgic about the Elder even if you didn't get the rules right. Pendrake, people are devolving, getting weak. Babylonian children played with clay figures. Victorian children played with lead and tin figures. Today's children, plastic. Waves came feudally. Well, I mean, I don't think it's entirely bad that we stopped giving children lead. Let's go with that. Studies have shown letting kids chew on lead is not great. Which is not to say that lead figures are, like, that turned into a whole thing, and now it's cadmium paint is the devil, and it's like, oh my gosh, people, if you use these things as intended, you're fine. So lead miniatures are fine, just don't give them to kids who are young enough to chew them. So that is my little nostalgia one. Oh, I'll show one more dark sword as well. And this is another example of, this is definitely, even though this is like an elaborate base, this is not for open, this is for painters. And this is another one that started, I was showing someone how to paint transparent cloth. And if that was the thing about metal miniatures, because like I'd want to get all the mold lines off. Even for class miniatures, I go through and get most of the mold lines off. And it was like, once I'd put a certain investment time into them, it's like I would either not want to start or I would want to finish something, where now I'm very willing to just grab a plastic miniature and it's like, all right, I'll just goof around with that technique on the cloak and see if it works. And if I don't finish it, okay. I don't, like, I don't have to worry about the mold lines. I can just rinse it off. I don't even have to do priming. So the barrier to just trying things and experimenting is much lower with plastic, and I found that I became more willing to speed paint and goof around paint and just try things than I had been when everything was metal. I always had a few test miniatures, either ones that just didn't work out in painting or whatever thing. There was one guy, even though I did all that stuff that I told you with the painting and the epoxy, like, his arm just would not stay on. I painted it like 3 times, I think. I painted his skin and then the arm would fall off. And I'm like, okay, we're done. This is clearly a cursed miniature and I'm giving up. And then I think I would just use him as my sealer test. Like, when I was going to spray seal, to make sure I hadn't accidentally grabbed the primer, or that something wasn't going to frost or whatever, since it was painted, it was a good surface to test my sealer on. But then I also had Test Elf and a couple other miniatures that I would just paint and paint and paint over to practice freehand a particular size or test out a color scheme or whatever. And it now, with the ease and the lower expensive plastic, it's like I can go look for a miniature that's got a similar style cloak to, like, that. When I was painting this, I'll go back to the view. When I was painting this cloak, I'd seen something similar that someone else had posted, but the construction of the cloth was completely different. It was like a horizontal diaper folds, I guess, is that what they're called? But it was like horizontal folds. It was completely different, not these like vertical folds. So I'm like, I don't know if it's gonna work. Like, if I take that idea and I put it on this very different, like, sculpt structure, will it work? So I grabbed I had a bones that had those rolling type folds. I grabbed that. I spent about 15 minutes doing a little example, and I'm like, yeah, proof of concept, it works. I will now invest the 5 hours it took to paint this cloak. So that is, there are so many things I do now more easily or less stressfully with plastic miniatures being a thing that is easily accessible than I used to do when it was like all metal all the time. But anyway, hopefully that wasn't totally boring. If you are thinking, and this goes to people watching in VOD or on YouTube, if you are thinking of coming to ReaperCon and you have questions about the MSP Open that I didn't answer, which it could be very many questions because I probably didn't answer a lot of questions, please feel free to let me know. You can DM me here, you can go in the YouTube comments, you can go on the Reaper forums. I have a artist Facebook page. I know Reaper has Discord. I never go there. Sorry. Don't contact me via Discord because I will never notice. And I will try to answer, or you can contact other people if you know someone else that is an artist at ReaperCon. They probably are also a judge and will know stuff about the MSP Open, or will know who to ask. Or if you have questions about contests in general that I haven't gone to, like Gen Con or some of the other ones for a while, but I can kind of give sort of general information or whatever. I might do another one where I'd go through some of the miniatures in more of a feedback way. But if you're interested in knowing more about feedback, there's like a bunch of stuff about that on the website that Quindy just shared, or is up there. There's like before and after examples where I've done repaints and stuff, and I'm hoping to do some of those here on this show Monday afternoons leading up to ReaperCon, so that we can try and get you some of the feedback in advance so that you can go make new mistakes and get better feedback. No, I don't know. Anyway, thank you for joining me. For me, Zachariah is asking, has the open format changed since the time we originally started doing it at ReaperCon, or pretty much the same? What do you mean by originally? Like, do you mean like 2013 or something? I would say the open format has changed in the sense that the expectation for the amount of sculpting or conversion is much higher. So if you weren't here at the beginning of the show, go back and watch after you can, because I showed a bunch of examples of, okay, this is a fancy base, but it really doesn't apply to open. Or this I did some conversions, but it isn't enough. It really wouldn't be in the spirit of open. And then I had a couple of examples where this is a little more. It would be suitable to put in open. One of the differences since 2013 is that we now have the diorama category. So if your skill is more in basing and scene setting and kind of creating an atmosphere and a story, there's a category where all of that is totally applicable, but it's not open. So open is kind of you both sculpt or heavily convert and paint. So weapon swap, head swap, those are not enough. You need to do a little more for it to really be in the spirit of open. I didn't talk about how we'll move categories if you get it wrong, so you don't have to stress about like getting it right. I was just trying to give some guidelines, but I'm sure we will talk more about the MSP Open either here or on other Reaper shows. And you're also welcome to ask me questions, or I'll try to talk about it again here. But I know I don't want to keep Quindy forever, because I know she probably has to go to the restroom just like I do. So thanks for coming. Thanks for putting up with my... Yes, Bryce is saying weapons swap is not a lot. Yeah, no, not... Open is more than a head swap or a weapon swap. It's got to be significant conversion where you're doing some resculpting or heavy changes and stuff like that. But if you came in late, I did run through some examples, and the webpage that I was mentioning that I have up on my site, which is called Miniature Contests at Conventions and Shows. So if you go in a blog article, there's a little search thing. You just type in contest. That one should come up. No, that's not it. That one is where you find out shows to enter. Like if you can't come to ReaperCon, there might be other contests you can come to. What you want to look for is the MSP Open Medals FAQ, and that has examples of what does and doesn't fit better in each of the categories, and the considerations that are made for, because one of the questions that we get is, well, I feel like the bronze, the gold in painters is a different standard than the gold. The painting you are talking about is different than the gold in open. And it's like, yeah, you don't have to paint as well as open. You have to do a bunch of other stuff as well in open. So that's a perfectly true observation, and I explain a little more why in the link that Quindy just shared. But again, I was going to let her go. So we're going to let her find us a raid so that those of us who don't have to go to the restroom can still enjoy some hobby fun. And I'm pretty sure I will see you all next week. I don't think there's a secret holiday that I've forgotten again. Thanks for coming. I'll wait until I see Quindy pop a raid up before I sign off. I don't know if I can do anything else entertaining. Was there one I didn't show you? No, I might not have shown you this guy. So here, I'll just switch to this, and then it looks like we got a raid. There's another Dark Sword miniature. So thanks for coming, everyone. Say hi to Monument Hobbies, and I'll see you hopefully next week. Bye.